In 1905, a photograph was taken of a young girl standing alone in what appeared to be an empty field, but modern digital enhancement would reveal that she was never truly alone. Something else was watching from the shadows, something that had been waiting for over a century to be seen. Before we begin this chilling journey into the past, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our investigations into history's darkest secrets. Dr. Margaret Whitmore had spent 15 years cataloging photographic collections at the Northeastern Historical Archive, her practiced eye trained to spot the telltale signs of deterioration, chemical damage, and the subtle inconsistencies that marked forgeries or manipulated images. Her office, tucked away in the basement of the century-old brick building that housed the archive, was a testament to her dedication. Walls lined with filing cabinets containing thousands of historical documents, multiple computer monitors displaying high-resolution scans, and specialized lighting equipment that could reveal details invisible under normal conditions. On a particularly gray October morning in 2023, she found herself examining a recently donated collection from the estate of Edmund Carstairs, a once prominent family whose lineage had quietly faded into obscurity by the mid-20th century. The donation had arrived 3 weeks earlier in 17 carefully labeled archival boxes, accompanied by a brief letter from the estate's executor explaining that the family had maintained these materials for generations but had no living relatives interested in preserving them. The photograph that would change everything appeared unremarkable at first glance. It was a standard portrait-style image, measuring 4 by 6 inches, printed on albumen paper typical of the era. The paper showed the characteristic cream-colored tint and subtle surface sheen that distinguished authentic 19th-century photographs from modern reproductions. A young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, stood in the center of what appeared to be a barren field or meadow. She wore a simple white dress with dark stockings and boots, her hair arranged in the fashion of well-to-do children of the period, parted in the middle and pulled back into neat braids that hung over her shoulders. Her expression was solemn, almost melancholic, with dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets far beyond her years. There was something in her gaze that made Dr. Whitmore pause during her initial examination, a quality that seemed less like the typical stiffness of formal Victorian portraiture and more like genuine sadness or resignation. The background showed rolling hills and what appeared to be the edge of a forest or wooded area, creating an atmosphere of isolation that seemed almost deliberate in its composition. On the reverse side, written in careful script with fading brown ink that had oxidized to a rusty color over the decades, were the words, Constance Fairweather, Autumn 1905, Final Portrait. The word final struck Dr. Whitmore as an odd choice for a child's photograph, particularly given the formal nature of portrait photography in that era, when such sessions were expensive undertakings typically reserved for special occasions, family milestones, or significant life events. Most children's portraits from this period were labeled with simple identifiers, the child's name and perhaps the year. The addition of final suggested something more definitive, more conclusive than a routine portrait session. Following standard archival protocol, Dr. Whitmore began the digitization process, using the department's high-resolution scanner capable of capturing minute details invisible to the naked eye. The machine, a state-of-the-art device worth nearly $40,000 and capable of detecting variations in density and chemical composition across the photographic surface, hummed quietly as it worked. The scanning process required precise calibration. The photograph had to be positioned exactly flat against the scanner bed, with specialized weights holding it in place to prevent any movement that might cause distortion. The scanning process took nearly 20 minutes, during which the machine created a digital file at 4,800 dots per inch, revealing every fiber of the paper, every grain of the photographic emulsion, and every microscopic detail that time and the limitations of human vision had previously obscured. The resulting file was enormous, nearly 2 gigabytes of data that captured information far beyond what the original photographer could have anticipated preserving. When the scan completed and appeared on her monitor, Dr. Whitmore immediately noticed something that made her lean closer to the screen, adjusting her reading glasses and squinting at the high-resolution display that filled her largest computer monitor. In the background of the photograph, partially obscured by the shadows at the edge of the wooded area, there appeared to be shapes that had been completely invisible in the physical print. At first, she attributed this to the digital enhancement process, sometimes revealing artifacts or patterns that existed only in the scanning process itself, phantom images created by the interaction between the original photographic grain and the digital sensors, or compression artifacts that occurred during the file creation process. However, as she methodically adjusted the contrast and brightness levels using professional image analysis software that cost the archive nearly $10,000 annually to license, the shapes became more distinct, more deliberate in their arrangement, and undeniably intentional in their placement. They appeared to be figures, human figures, standing among the trees in what seemed like a carefully orchestrated arrangement. Dr. Whitmore spent the remainder of that day and well into the evening examining the enhanced image, canceling her usual lunch break and working past the archive's normal closing time. She applied different filters, adjusted gamma levels, used edge detection algorithms, and employed every digital enhancement technique in her considerable arsenal to bring out details that had been hidden in the shadows for over a century. She cross-referenced the image with known photographic techniques from the period, consulted technical manuals about album and printing processes, and even contacted colleagues at other institutions to verify that her enhancement methods were producing accurate results rather than digital artifacts. What she discovered defied logical explanation and challenged everything she thought she understood about historical photography and the technical limitations of early 20th century camera equipment. There were at least 6 distinct human silhouettes arranged in a perfect semicircle behind the tree line, all appearing to face toward the young girl in the foreground with an attention that seemed almost predatory in its intensity. The figures were positioned approximately 50 to 70 feet behind the main subject, too far away to make out specific features or facial details under normal circumstances, but their positioning suggested they were deliberately arranged with mathematical precision. Each figure was spaced exactly the same distance from its neighbors, creating a symmetrical pattern that would have required careful planning and coordination to achieve. The arrangement was too perfect, too calculated to be accidental. Someone had positioned these figures with the same attention to detail that a professional photographer would use when arranging subjects for a formal group portrait. More disturbing was the gradual realization that these figures cast no shadows, despite the clear evidence of strong afternoon sunlight that illuminated every other element in the photograph. The lighting conditions were clearly documented in the main portion of the image. Dr. Whitmore could see the sharp shadows cast by the girl's dress, the distinct outline of her boots on the ground, and even the shadows of small wildflowers and weeds scattered around her feet. The sun had been positioned low in the sky, creating dramatic contrast and long shadows that stretched across the field. Every object in the foreground and middle distance of the photograph showed the expected interaction with this light source, yet the background figures existed in a state that seemed to defy the basic principles of light and physics. They appeared solid enough to be clearly distinguishable as human forms when digitally enhanced, yet they seemed to exist outside the normal rules that govern the rest of the photograph, as if they occupied a different plane of reality entirely or had been added to the image through some impossible photographic technique that wouldn't be invented for decades. Dr. Whitmore's first instinct was to consult with her colleague, Professor David Chen, who specialized in photographic analysis and had extensive experience with 19th and early 20th century imaging techniques. Professor Chen maintained an office 2 floors above the archive in the same building, where he taught graduate courses in historical documentation and served as a consultant for museums and law enforcement agencies investigating potentially fraudulent historical materials. Professor Chen had worked on several high-profile authentication cases, including the famous investigation into supposed Civil War photographs that had turned out to be elaborate 20th-century forgeries created by a disgruntled graduate student, and the analysis of daguerreotypes allegedly depicting undocumented battles from the Mexican-American War that had eventually been proven authentic and historically significant. When she showed him the enhanced digital file the following morning, his initial reaction mirrored her own. Fascination mixed with growing unease and professional skepticism that gradually gave way to genuine concern as he applied his own analytical methods to the image. The original plate would have required an exposure time of at least 30 seconds in those lighting conditions, Professor Chen observed, adjusting his glasses as he studied the monitor with the intensity of a detective examining crime scene evidence. Given the available light, the type of photographic equipment commonly used in 1905, and the apparent depth of field, possibly even longer, maybe 45 seconds to a full minute. He manipulated the image controls, zooming in on different sections and applying various filters to examine the photographic grain structure and tonal relationships. For figures to appear this clearly in the background, even when digitally enhanced, they would have had to remain absolutely motionless for the entire duration of the exposure. Any movement at all would have created blur or ghosting effects that would be visible even at this distance. But look at the positioning. They're arranged with mathematical precision, each figure placed at an exact distance from the others. This isn't random. This isn't accidental. Someone deliberately arranged these figures with the same care they would use to set up a formal group portrait. He paused, running his fingers through his graying beard as he contemplated the implications of what they were seeing. There's something else that bothers me about this image. Look at the depth of field, the range of distances that appear in sharp focus. In 1905, achieving this level of focus throughout the entire frame, from the foreground subject to the background figures, would have required very specific camera settings and optimal lighting conditions. The photographer would have needed to use a small aperture, which would have further increased the required exposure time. This photograph was taken by someone with considerable technical expertise, not a casual amateur or even a typical portrait photographer of the era. The photograph was authentic. The paper composition, the chemical characteristics of the emulsion, the aging patterns, and the physical deterioration all confirmed its genuine 1905 origins, and that made its contents all the more disturbing and inexplicable. Dr. Whitmore decided to investigate the Carstairs family history, beginning with public records and genealogical databases available through the archive's extensive research partnerships with universities and historical societies throughout New England. The family had been prominent in the textile industry during the late 19th century, owning several mills and employing hundreds of workers in the small industrial town of Millbrook, approximately 60 miles north of their current location. The Carstairs name appeared frequently in local newspapers of the era, usually in connection with business expansions, charitable donations, or social events that marked them as pillars of the community. Edmund Carstairs, the family patriarch, had been featured in several newspaper profiles as an example of successful American entrepreneurship, and the family's annual charity balls were regularly covered in the society pages of regional newspapers. What she discovered in the historical records raised more questions than it answered, and painted a picture that grew increasingly troubling with each new piece of information she uncovered. According to the Millbrook town records, there was indeed a Constance Fairweather listed in the 1900 census as an 8-year-old child living with the Carstairs family at their estate on Elm Street. However, her status was listed as ward, suggesting she was not a blood relative, but rather a child under their legal guardianship, possibly an orphan or a child whose parents had been unable to care for her due to poverty, illness, or death. The census records showed that the Carstairs household included several such children, all listed with the same ward designation, creating what appeared to be an early form of foster care arrangement that was not uncommon among wealthy families of the era, who saw it as both a charitable duty and a source of domestic labor. More intriguing was the discovery that Constance's name appeared in the town's death records dated November 15, 1905, just 6 weeks after the photograph was allegedly taken according to the inscription on the back. The cause of death was listed simply as consumption, a common 19th century term for tuberculosis, which had reached epidemic proportions in many industrial communities of the era due to poor sanitation, overcrowded living conditions, and the polluted air produced by coal-burning factories. But when Dr. Whitmore requested the full death certificate from the Millbrook Town Clerk's office, paying the administrative fee and waiting 3 weeks for the document to be located in the town's basement archives, she discovered something that made her question everything she thought she understood about the photograph and its subjects. The death certificate, filed in the official records and bearing the seal of the town registrar, along with the required signatures of witnesses, was signed by Dr. Horace Blackwood, the town physician. However, according to the certificate, Constance Fairweather had died on March 3, 1905, 7 months before the photograph was supposedly taken. Either the photograph was mislabeled, the death certificate was incorrect, or it showed a child who had been dead for more than half a year when the image was captured. Dr. Whitmore's investigation took on a new urgency as she delved deeper into the historical records, requesting documents from multiple repositories, contacting historical societies in neighboring towns, and cross-referencing information across different databases and archives. She discovered that Dr. Horace Blackwood had been the subject of several investigations by the State Medical Board between 1904 and 1907. The complaints, filed by families in Millbrook and preserved in the State Medical Board's archives, alleged that Blackwood had been falsifying death certificates, conducting unauthorized medical experiments on patients without their consent, maintaining inadequate records of his patients' treatments and outcomes, and charging excessive fees for services that other physicians in the region provided at standard rates. More disturbing was the pattern she began to identify in the town's death records as she expanded her research beyond Constance Fairweather to include all child deaths in Millbrook during the relevant time period. Between 1904 and 1906, there had been an unusually high number of deaths among children living as wards with prominent families in Millbrook. Not just the Carstairs family, but several other wealthy households that had taken in orphaned or displaced children as part of what appeared to be an organized charitable effort coordinated by the town's leading citizens. The death rate among these children was nearly 3 times higher than the general population, even accounting for the higher mortality rates common in that era due to infectious diseases, poor medical care, and inadequate nutrition. However, when Dr. Whitmore cross-referenced these deaths with school attendance records maintained by the Millbrook Public School, church registries from the town's 3 major congregations, and local newspaper accounts of community events, she found multiple instances where children who were officially recorded as deceased continued to appear in other documents for months or even years afterward. The records suggested a pattern of systematic deception that had somehow escaped official notice for over a century. Some children had been declared dead while they were still alive, while others seemed to have lived on long after their official deaths, creating a bureaucratic nightmare that challenged the reliability of all official records from that period. If you're still watching, tell me where you're from and what time it is. Knowing that people around the world are learning this story simultaneously somehow makes the shared burden of this knowledge a little easier to bear. Like the video and subscribe for more stories that history tried to bury, but that refused to stay hidden forever.